Imagine walking into your child's school for their first day, only to be humiliated and thrown out over a simple hat. But what the teacher didn't know was that the father she insulted wasn't just any man. He was her new boss. What happens next will leave you stunned and questioning everything. Stay tuned. Before you speak or act against someone, think twice. The person standing calmly, speaking kindly without anger or abuse, might be far more powerful and influential than they appear. Never underestimate simplicity. Sometimes, the most unassuming people hold the greatest strength. Comments below where you're watching from, and if you like and love our story, kindly subscribe our channel. Life, inspirational, and motivational tales that explore themes of love, unity, and patriotism. Stay with us always for interesting stories. Thanks. Let's start the story. The morning sun bathed Brightview Elementary School in a warm glow, the kind of light that promised a new beginning. Children laughed and ran around the schoolyard, their backpacks bouncing as parents offered last-minute hugs and words of encouragement. The chatter and joy created a hum of excitement that filled the air. Among the crowd, Thomas Graham, a composed man in his mid-40s, walked steadily beside his son Sam, an eager 8-year-old with bright eyes and a wanton stare. Both father and son wore bright red MAGA hats, the bold white letters "Make America Great Again" standing out vividly. Their faces were calm, a reflection of their excitement for Sam's first day at his new school. Thomas glanced at his son and smiled, his voice gentle but confident. "Ready for this, buddy? First day of 3rd grade. It's gonna be great." Sam nodded enthusiastically, clutching his father's hand a little tighter. "Yeah, Dad. I think I'm gonna make lots of friends." Inside Brightview Elementary, the scene was a mix of controlled chaos and anticipation. In room 5B, Laura Perkins, a fiercely opinionated teacher in her late 30s, arranged a stack of brightly colored books on her desk. Laura had a reputation among the staff for being passionate but headstrong, someone who often let her personal beliefs spill into her professional life. Her classroom, decorated with posters advocating kindness and equality, reflected her desire to shape young minds. Today, as the bell neared, her focus was razor sharp. She wanted to ensure everything was perfect. The buzz of students filing into the room was almost rhythmic. Laura projected authority as she moved through her classroom, her crisp voice giving directions and her movements purposeful. But when the door opened and Thomas and Sam stepped inside, the energy in the room shifted. Laura's gaze immediately locked onto the bright red hats. Her smile faded, her body stiffened, and her hand paused mid-air as she reached for a marker. The contrast was stark. While Sam looked around in wonder at his new classroom, Laura's expression turned hard, her eyes narrowed, and her lips pressed into a thin line. The sight of those hats ignited something in her, a mix of frustration and indignation that she couldn't contain. "Excuse me," Laura said, her voice cutting through the classroom chatter. She approached them with deliberate steps, her irritation visible in her furrowed brows and the set of her jaw. Thomas turned toward her, his face calm and polite. "Good morning," he said, offering a friendly smile. "I'm Thomas Graham, and this is my son, Sam. It's his first day here." Laura didn't return the smile. Instead, her eyes remained fixed on the hats. "I'm sorry, but you can't wear those here." she said sharply, crossing her arms. Her tone was firm, almost confrontational. Thomas's brow furrowed slightly. I'm sorry, what did you mean? I mean those hats, Laura said, her voice rising slightly. They're offensive. They have no place in this classroom or this school. Sam's smile faltered as he looked up at his father, confusion clouding his excitement. Thomas bent down to his son's level, giving his shoulder a reassuring squeeze before standing back up to face Laura. It's just a hat, Thomas said evenly, his voice calm but firm. We're here to start Sam's first day of school, nothing more. Laura's expression hardened further. It's not just a hat, she retorted. It's a symbol of intolerance, and I won't have it in my classroom. The classroom had gone silent, the buzz of student chatter replaced by a tense stillness. A few children glanced nervously between their teacher and the newcomers. Thomas met Laura's gaze, his calm demeanor unshaken. With all due respect, Miss Perkins, Sam is here to learn, not to make a statement. Let's focus on that. Laura didn't budge. Her arms remained crossed, and her stance remained defensive. Then take them off, she demanded, her voice firm, or I'll have to ask you to leave. Thomas sighed, glancing at Sam, who now looked up at his father with wide, unsure eyes. The day had barely begun, and already the warm excitement they'd felt just moments ago was being overshadowed by conflict. Thomas squared his shoulders, meeting Laura's gaze with quiet authority. We're not here to cause trouble, he said, but we're also not going to be forced out over a piece of clothing. My son has every right to be here, just like every other child. Laura's lips thinned into a tight line. The tension in the room was palpable, and the first bell hadn't even rung yet. For Laura, this was about standing up for her principles. For Thomas, it was about standing up for his son. Neither was willing to back down, setting the stage for what promised to be an unforgettable first day of school. The tension in the classroom grew heavier with each passing moment. Laura Perkins stood with her arms crossed, her stance rigid, as if she were planting herself firmly on moral high ground. Her gaze flicked between Thomas Graham and his son Sam, the bright red MAGA hats on their heads fueling her indignation. This isn't about education, Laura said, her voice tinged with frustration. It's about creating a safe and inclusive environment for everyone. Those hats, those symbols, don't belong here. Sam, just an 8-year-old excited for his first day of school, clung to his father's side. The joy that had lit up his face earlier was gone, replaced by confusion and a tinge of fear. He didn't understand what was happening or why his new teacher seemed so upset with them. Thomas, ever composed, placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. Miss Perkins, he said, his tone calm but resolute, we're not here to make a statement or cause a scene. My son is here to learn, just like every other child in this room. Let's focus on that. But Laura wasn't swayed. You don't understand, she snapped. That hat represents hate. It's intolerable. I understand your perspective, Thomas replied evenly, his voice unwavering. But this is a classroom, not a platform for personal politics. Let's put our energy into teaching and creating a positive experience for the kids. The students in the room, sensing the growing tension, sat frozen in their seats. Whispers began to ripple through the group, and a few of the braver ones peeked over at Sam and Thomas. One child nudged their neighbor, mouthing, "What's going on?" Laura's frustration boiled over. She turned on her heel and marched to her desk, grabbing the phone. "If you're not going to respect the rules of my classroom," she said sharply, "then I'll have no choice but to involve security." Sam looked up at his father, his small voice trembling. "Dad, are we in trouble?" Thomas knelt down to meet his son's eye level, his expression calm and reassuring. "No, buddy," he said softly. "We're not in trouble. Sometimes people make decisions without thinking everything through, but we're going to handle this the right way." Laura's voice broke through the quiet hum of the room as she spoke into the receiver. "Yes, this is Laura Perkins in room 5B. I need security to address a disruptive situation immediately." She hung up and turned back to Thomas, her arms crossed once more. "You're leaving one way or another," she said coldly. The air in the classroom was thick with unease. A few parents lingering in the hallway peeked through the door. Curiosity and concern etched on their faces. Some discreetly pulled out their phones, recording the unfolding scene. The whispers grew louder, and it was clear that this confrontation wasn't going unnoticed. A few minutes later, 2 security guards appeared at the door. They exchanged wary glances as they took in the scene. A man standing calmly beside his son, facing off against an agitated teacher. One of the guards stepped forward, his voice measured. "Ma'am, what seems to be the issue?" Laura wasted no time. "These two," she said, pointing an accusatory finger at Thomas and Sam, "are disrupting my classroom. I've asked them to leave, and they've refused." The guards looked at Thomas, their expressions betraying their unease. He stood tall, his posture steady, with his hand still resting protectively on Sam's shoulder. "I don't believe we've disrupted anything," Thomas said calmly. "We're here for my son's first day of school, that's all." Laura interjected, her voice rising. "Those hats are offensive. They're creating a hostile environment for the other students." The guards hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. One of them turned to Thomas. "Sir, we'd appreciate it if you and your son stepped out of the classroom for now, just to de-escalate the situation." Thomas exhaled slowly. He wasn't about to let the situation escalate further, especially not in front of Sam. "Of course," he said, his tone steady. He turned to his son and gave him a small smile. "Let's go, bud." As they walked toward the door, the murmurs among the students and parents grew louder. Phones were still recording, and a few parents exchanged incredulous looks. "What's going on?" one whispered. "Why is she making such a big deal?" Sam tugged gently on his father's sleeve as they exited the room. "Dad," he said quietly, "did we do something bad?" Thomas crouched down again, looking his son in the eye. "No, Sam," he said firmly. "We didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes people make quick judgments because they don't understand, and that's not your fault. The important thing is that we stay respectful and kind no matter what." Sam nodded slowly, though his small face still showed traces of confusion and hurt. Thomas straightened up and led his son down the hallway, his mind racing. He wasn't angry at Laura, not exactly. What he felt was deeper than anger. It was disappointing. disappointment that, in a place meant to nurture and educate, his son had been subjected to judgment and exclusion over something as simple as a hat. But one thing was certain: Thomas wasn't going to let this slide. This wasn't just about today. It was about setting an example for his son and for everyone watching. If Laura Perkins thought this was the end of the story, she was about to learn otherwise. The next morning, Brightview Elementary was alive with speculation and energy. Teachers bustled into the auditorium for the staff meeting, eager to meet the new principal and hear his plans for the school. The air was thick with whispered conversations, most revolving around the mystery leader no one had yet met. Laura Perkins entered the room with an air of self-assuredness, her tote bag swinging with a confidence that stemmed from the events of the previous day. In her mind, she had defended the integrity of her classroom and made a stand for what she believed was right. She settled into a seat near the front, straightening her posture and smoothing her blouse, ready to make a favorable impression on the new principal. She had no idea that her world was about to be turned upside down. The murmurs in the room grew louder as the clock ticked closer to the start time. Then, just as the final few staff members filed in, the doors at the back of the auditorium swung open. A tall figure stepped inside, his presence commanding instant attention. He was dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, the kind that spoke of both professionalism and authority. In his hand, however, was the unmistakable symbol from the day before, a bright red MAGA hat. Thomas Graham walked calmly down the aisle, his eyes scanning the room. His expression was composed, but his steps radiated confidence. The staff fell silent, their gazes darting between Thomas and the hat, which he now carried with deliberate ease. For most of the room, the realization came gradually, marked by widening eyes and hushed gasps. For Laura, it hit like a freight train. She stared at Thomas as he approached the podium, her mind racing to process what she was seeing. The calm, polite parent from yesterday, the one she had berated and humiliated, was standing before them as the new principal. Her face turned ashen, her bravado crumbling with every step he took. Thomas reached the podium, placed the hat gently on its surface, and turned to face the staff. He let the silence linger for a moment, the weight of the moment settling over the room like a heavy blanket. Then, in a calm and steady voice, he began. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his tone warm but authoritative. "My name is Thomas Graham, and I am honored to serve as the new principal of Brightview Elementary." The ripple of murmurs that followed was quickly silenced by the intensity of his gaze. He continued, "I've spent over 2 decades in education, and in that time I've learned one fundamental truth. A school is more than just a place to learn. It's a community. And in a community, respect is not optional. It's essential." His words resonated deeply, his measured delivery drawing every pair of eyes in the room. Thomas spoke of his vision for the school, emphasizing the importance of fostering an environment where every child felt valued and supported. "Our job," he said, "is to set an example for our students. That means professionalism, inclusivity, and the ability to put personal opinions aside to serve a greater purpose." As he spoke, his gaze swept across the room, pausing briefly on Laura. The moment was subtle, but she felt it like a spotlight shining directly on her. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her confidence from earlier completely eroded. Her mind raced as she replayed the events of the previous day, her actions now reframed in the harsh light of hindsight. Thomas continued, outlining practical steps for the school's growth. He spoke of initiatives to support both students and staff, professional development opportunities, and a renewed focus on collaboration. The teachers listened intently, many nodding in agreement. Even those who had initially been skeptical of the new principal found themselves impressed by his calm authority and clear vision. When the meeting concluded, the staff began to disperse, buzzing with conversation about their new leader. Laura, however, stayed rooted in her seat, her mind swirling with a mix of dread and embarrassment. She didn't have to wait long before Thomas approached her. "Hey, Miss Perkins," he said, his tone polite but firm. "Could I have a moment in my office?" She nodded mutely, her usual confidence nowhere to be found. The walk to his office felt interminable, each step heavy with the weight of what she knew was coming. When they arrived, Thomas gestured for her to sit, then closed the door behind them. The quiet click of the latch seemed to echo in the room. Thomas took a seat behind his desk, his expression calm but serious. He folded his hands and looked directly at Laura. "I think we need to address what happened yesterday," he began. Laura hesitated, searching for the right words. "Mr. Graham, Pleading, Thomas interrupted gently but firmly, "Call me Thomas. And I'd like to be clear, this isn't about politics or personal beliefs. This is about your role as an educator and the expectations that come with it." Laura nodded slowly, her usual sharp tongue momentarily silenced. Thomas leaned forward slightly, his voice steady. "I understand that you have strong opinions. We all do. But when you step into that classroom, your primary responsibility is to create a safe and welcoming environment for every student. Yesterday, that didn't happen." I didn't mean to," Laura started, but Thomas raised a hand to stop her. "I believe you," he said. "But intent and impact are two different things. What my son and I experienced yesterday was exclusion. That's not what this school stands for, and it's not what I stand for." Laura's face burned with shame. She wanted to argue, to explain herself, but deep down she knew he was right. Her actions had crossed a line, and no amount of justification could change that. Thomas softened his tone slightly, though his words remained firm. "You're a talented teacher, Laura. I've seen your records, and I know you care deeply about your students. But this is a moment to reflect and grow. Going forward, I expect professionalism and respect from you, both in and out of the classroom." Laura nodded again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir." Thomas stood, signaling the end of the conversation. "We all make mistakes," he said. "What matters is how we choose to move forward. I believe you can use this experience to become an even better educator." She rose from her seat, the weight of his words settling heavily on her shoulders. As she left the office, Laura felt a mix of gratitude and resolve. She had been given a second chance, but she knew it came with the expectation of change. Meanwhile, Thomas returned to his desk. the MAGA hat still sitting on its surface. It wasn't just a hat. It was a quiet reminder of the values he was committed to upholding: respect, inclusivity, and the unwavering belief that every student deserved a place to thrive. Thomas wasted no time implementing his vision for Brightview Elementary. At the next staff meeting, he stood before the teachers, his tone firm yet encouraging, and laid out his plans. "This school will be a place where every student feels safe, respected, and valued," he began. "That means zero tolerance for discrimination of any kind. It doesn't matter what a student wears, where they come from, or what their family believes. Our job is to educate and uplift, not to judge." His words set the tone for the sweeping changes to come. Thomas announced mandatory training sessions on diversity, professionalism, and bias awareness for all staff. These sessions would challenge the teachers to confront their unconscious biases and understand the importance of creating an inclusive environment. It was clear that this was not just a directive, it was a cornerstone of his leadership. For Laura Perkins, the announcement was a bitter pill to swallow. Though she nodded along during the meeting, inside she felt singled out and defensive. Her actions had been exposed, and now the policies felt like a personal indictment. "I was just standing up for what I believed in," she told a colleague after the meeting, her voice tinged with frustration. But deep down she knew her actions had caused harm, and the mandatory training loomed over her like a storm cloud. The first training session was an eye-opener for the staff. The facilitator, an experienced educator and advocate for inclusivity, began by sharing stories of students who had faced prejudice in schools. "Bias doesn't always announce itself," the facilitator explained. "Sometimes it's in the small things, an assumption, a glance, a tone. But those small things can have a big impact." Laura sat stiffly, arms crossed as the session continued. She resisted the exercises, feeling like they were aimed squarely at her. When asked to reflect on moments she might have judged someone unfairly, she gave generic answers, avoiding the real incident that had brought her to this point. It wasn't until a video was shown, a story of a child who had been excluded because of a teacher's bias, that something shifted. The child's tearful account hit uncomfortably close to home, and Laura found herself blinking back tears. Meanwhile, the school was transforming under Thomas's leadership. His zero-tolerance policy for discrimination wasn't just words, it was backed by action. Students and parents began noticing the changes almost immediately. Teachers were more mindful of their language, more inclusive in their lesson plans, and more empathetic in their interactions with students. The energy at Brightview Elementary shifted, becoming warmer and more welcoming. For Laura, the change was challenging. She found herself in situations where she had to rethink her approach to students and parents. One day, a parent wearing a political slogan on their shirt came to pick up their child. Laura caught herself before making a judgment, instead focusing on the parents' concerns about their child's progress. The conversation ended positively, and Laura felt a flicker of pride. It was a small step, but it showed her that her perspective was shifting. Thomas didn't single Laura out, but his leadership style had a way of nudging people toward growth. He often checked in with teachers, asking how they were finding the training and encouraging them to share their thoughts. When Laura expressed frustration about the changes, Thomas listened without judgment. "Change isn't easy," he told her one afternoon, "but the fact that you're here, trying, that matters." As the weeks turned into months, Laura began to see the results of the new policies. Her classroom felt different. Students who had once been hesitant to participate were now raising their hands eagerly. Parents who had previously been distant started engaging more with her, trusting that their children were in good hands. Slowly but surely, Laura's interactions with her colleagues improved as well. The staff, once divided by cliques and unspoken tensions, was becoming more cohesive, united by a shared commitment to the students. One memorable moment came during a school assembly. A student stood up to share their experience of feeling excluded in the past and how things had changed since Thomas became principal. "Now I feel like I belong," the student said, their voice trembling with emotion. The room erupted into applause, and Laura found herself clapping the loudest. It was a turning point for her, a realization that the changes weren't just about policies or training. They were about real people, real lives. Laura continued to attend the training sessions, and though she still found them challenging, she approached them with a more open mind. She began participating more actively, sharing her thoughts and asking questions. During one session on unconscious bias, she spoke candidly about her experience with Thomas and Sam. "I thought I was standing up for my values," she admitted, "but I see now that I wasn't listening. I wasn't thinking about how my actions would affect others." Her honesty was met with nods of understanding from her colleagues. The facilitator commended her for her vulnerability, reminding the group that growth often came from moments of discomfort. For Laura, it was a moment of catharsis. She felt a weight lift off her shoulders, replaced by a determination to do better. The changes at Brightview Elementary didn't go unnoticed in the broader community. Parents praised the school's welcoming atmosphere, and enrollment began to rise. Teachers from other schools visited to observe and learn from the new culture. Thomas's leadership was credited with turning the school into a model of inclusivity and respect. For Laura, the transformation was personal as well as professional. She no longer approached her classroom with an air of authority and judgment. Instead, she cultivated an environment where every student felt valued and heard. She found joy in teaching again, and her relationships with her students deepened. One day, Thomas stopped by her classroom unannounced. He observed quietly as Laura led a discussion on empathy and understanding. The students were engaged, sharing their thoughts and listening to one another. When the lesson ended, Thomas approached Laura with a smile. "You've done an incredible job," he said. "Your growth has been remarkable." Laura felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you," she said. "I couldn't have done it without your guidance." Thomas shook his head. "You chose to change. That's all you." As Laura watched Thomas leave, she realized how far she had come. The woman who had once reacted with anger and judgment was now a teacher her students could look up to. A teacher who had learned the power of listening, understanding, and change. And In that moment, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Over the months, Laura transformed in ways she never thought possible. The once headstrong and unyielding teacher found herself embracing vulnerability, humility, and a willingness to grow. She began mentoring new teachers, a role that allowed her to share her story as a cautionary tale. Her honesty about the mistakes she made and the lessons she learned resonated deeply with her colleagues. "None of us are perfect," she would tell the new hires during orientation sessions. "But when we acknowledge our biases and work to overcome them, we can become the teachers our students deserve." Her relationship with Thomas, once defined by tension and misunderstanding, evolved into one of mutual respect. She admired his ability to lead with empathy and firm resolve, and he recognized her sincere efforts to change. They often found themselves collaborating on projects to further enhance the school's culture, each valuing the other's input. As the school year progressed, Laura began to shine in her classroom. She fostered a learning environment where every child felt safe and valued, regardless of their background or beliefs. Her students thrived under her care, their confidence growing as they realized their teacher truly cared for them. Parents noticed too, expressing gratitude for her newfound openness and warmth during parent-teacher conferences. At the end of the year, the school held its annual appreciation event, a time to celebrate the achievements of staff and students. The auditorium buzzed with excitement as families, teachers, and community members gathered to honor the progress made under Thomas's leadership. The event culminated with Thomas delivering a hard speech about the importance of respect, inclusivity, and second chances. Laura, seated in the front row, felt a surge of emotion as Thomas spoke. His words were a reminder of how far she had come and how far the school had come as a community. When the event concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Laura approached Thomas. "Thomas," she said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion, "I just wanted to say thank you." Thomas turned to her with a warm smile. "Thank me? Laura, you've done the hard work. You're the one who chose to change." She shook her head, her expression earnest. "But you gave me the chance. You didn't have to. And because of that, I've become a better teacher and, honestly, a better person. I'll always be grateful for that." Thomas nodded, his smile widening. "Everyone deserves a second chance. I'm glad you took yours and ran with it." The impact of their work extended far beyond the walls of Brightview Elementary. The school became a model for inclusivity and professionalism, drawing attention from educators and community leaders across the region. Thomas's leadership was lauded not for any flashy initiatives, but for his unwavering commitment to creating a culture of respect and fairness. Laura emerged as an advocate for these values, speaking at conferences and workshops about her journey. She shared how acknowledging her mistakes and working to change had transformed not only her classroom, but her life. Her story inspired others to reflect on their own biases and take steps toward personal growth. One evening, as Thomas prepared to leave his office, he glanced at the MAGA hat resting on his desk. The hat, once a symbol of division in the eyes of others, now served as a quiet testament to his belief in fairness, respect, and the power of second chances. It reminded him of the challenges he had faced and the progress he had witnessed. Thomas leaned back in his chair, reflecting on the journey. He thought about Sam, whose excitement on the first day of school had sparked such an unexpected chain of events. He thought about Laura, who had turned her greatest mistake into an opportunity for growth. And he thought about the students and staff of Brightview Elementary, who now thrived in a community built on empathy and understanding. It began to, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the school grounds, Thomas smiled. Brightview Elementary wasn't just a school. It was a symbol of what could be achieved when people chose kindness over judgment and growth over stubbornness. And for Thomas, that was the greatest achievement of all. Before you speak or act against someone, think twice. The person standing calmly, speaking kindly without anger or abuse, might be far more powerful and influential than they appear. Never underestimate simplicity. Sometimes, the most unassuming people hold the greatest strength. Comments below where you're watching from, and if you like and love our story, kindly subscribe our channel. Life, inspirational, and motivational tales that explore themes of love, unity, and patriotism. Stay with us always for interesting stories.